How did that go? Was it too easy, too hard?
It was not really too easy.
What's that?
It was fair.
It was fair.
Yeah.
Like, how long did you spend on it, just to get an idea?
The thing is, we have to like go through the notes first and do it. So the assignment itself didn't take much time, but
Yeah.
going through the notes and took some time to understand whatever we do. Yeah, but the assignment itself wasn't.
It was just about manipulating, and trying to get a triangle from what you already.
Maybe I should make it harder. Well, you don't have to do it again. No, now that you've done it, like, should I, make it harder or easier? That's what I'm interested in. I'm not going to make you do it again.
It will depend on the students next year. Maybe you might do the statement, they think it's hard or it's too easy for them.
Well, I'm sampling from you guys. You're my test. Okay. Any other things we need to mention before we start?
No.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah. In honors, did you guys all did National Honors, is that right?
Yes.
And did you do any deconvolution then? Or talk about it at all?
Yes, we did, but the way that the course was structured last year, it was like very confusing. It was not well structured, so.
Okay. All right. Well, we're always trying to improve it. But you guys, you've heard of deconvolution, don't necessarily know what it is, or in the context of radio astronomy. Okay. Well, that's all right. That's the whole point of the lecture. So there's so deconvolution. We've talked quite a bit about convolution, right? This idea, in this one of these homework assignments, you convolving two functions together and to produce a new function. So there's kind of the inverse problem of saying you're.
Can we borrow it?
That is the 14th?
Yes.
Next time. Convolution is this kind of merging two functions together, whereas deconvolution is, say, given a function, can you break that up into its two components, right? The inverse problem. And there's many ways to approach it, and it's very kind of specific to the field you're in. And so when we talk about deconvolution in interferometry, it's very particular. It's I would almost say it's unique to radio astronomy. It's really hard to find other fields in which you talk about deconvolution this way. The idea is that you iteratively separate things out. Okay, so what do I mean by that? That's all right. So typically we have some point spread function due to the array, due to the bandwidth, how we observe the declination, remember? And then we have some sky model. You can kind of see a few point sources here, right? Because these are our objects in the sky. This is what we want. We want some true idea of what the sky looks like. This is all due to the instrument. This is something we would like to get rid of. But what we start with is after we make kind of an observation, we make an image, a dirty image, we get this, which is convolution, effectively the convolution of the PSF with that sky model. So that's our dirty image, right? And you can see that if you were to take these two things and convolve them together, you get this, which looks pretty similar to the dirty image, because they are effectively the same thing. There's a difference here because of some kind of computation artifacts and whatnot, but for the most part, the dirty image is the convolution of the sky model with the PSF. Now, you don't know what the sky model is. you have some idea about what the PSF is, and so we want to somehow remove that PSF structure and get back to the sky model. That's the deconvolution process we're trying to accomplish. Yeah.
So if I get it correctly,
Yeah.
the convolution
Yeah.
is you get a signal to the antenna and then it's connected
Hmm.
the instrument response.
Yeah.
And it gets the observed speed.
Yeah. So this would be our observed visibility. That observed visibility if we made an image from this.
Okay.
And you can see that this is the same as this PSF involved with the sky model, which is these two things. So this is real. This is the real sky, let's say. But this is PSF because of, we have some array layout of some number of antennas that aren't quite sampling the visibilities completely. They have some bandwidth, they have some declination, right? Some length of time we're observing for it to produce this structure. So this is all instrumentational. So it's an attempt to remove the instrumentational effects and get back to what we're really interested in. Yeah.
So the deconvolution is now you want to take away you want to get the real sky.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's the physics? Yeah, at the bottom of it. Then there's all. It's a challenging thing. I'll show you. Step through that of how we do this. How do we separate the signal? That's the challenge. Okay, so the dumbest way you can think about doing this is that, well, you know what convolution is. So H is the convolution of some function f and g, right? Very simple. And we know through the Fourier relationship with convolution theorem that if you take the Fourier transform of H, and you can, these are which is simply kind of the multiplication of the Fourier transform of f with the Fourier transform of g, and you can kind of rearrange it and whatnot. And so say you want to recover f, given that you know H and you know G. And in this case, you can think of H as this observed dirty image. F is that true sky model, and G is the array PSF. And so you can kind of rearrange things to recover F, simply the Fourier transform of the observed sky divided by the Fourier transform of the PSF. Then you inverse Fourier transform that. So that's just an application of the convolution theorem to get F. It should be that simple, right? Mathematically, that's very nice. It looks right. This is what's called inverse filtering, and it seems like a nice slick way. If it was that easy, the lecture would kind of be over. It's unfortunately that's not quite right. So same story. This is what happens when you do that. So you start with, we know this true sky model because of the simulation we're doing. If you go through that inverse filtering process, you produce this image, which basically has nothing in it. There's a few kind of things on the edge. There's maybe this like weird ripple thing going on. Basically, it doesn't reproduce the sky. Turns out inverse filtering is not the solution. There's this little problem we forget about, is that we have a very noisy system. And so what happens is the dirty image just isn't simply the Fourier transform of the point spread function with the true sky. It's that, but there's this error factor, kind of the system noise. We don't know everything precisely, and just our receivers are noisy. All these elements add to this. And when that error is very small, as in you have a very high signal to noise observation, you can do inverse filtering, but that almost never happens in interferometry. When we go out and use an interferometer or an aperture array, we're trying to observe some source that's inherently weak, right? Because otherwise, either people have already observed it in the past, anything that's strong people have already observed, or because there's limited telescope time, you're only going to be allowed to observe enough to get a little bit of signal to noise to get to your object before you have to move on to something else. So you're never going to be in an environment where you can do inverse filtering and interferometry. So you can kind of think of, well, let's go something a little bit more complex. Let's think a little nicer. Say now we have some. Let's go back. Let's take a look at this. Look at this image. So this is what we want to start with, and we know obviously these bright little blobs are somehow sky sources, right? I mean, that one in the middle relates to some element of the sky model. So what you can do is say, well, let's just clip everything above a certain threshold. And say anything above a certain signal of noise is now a way to kind of separate that signal from noise, right? Is that you have some noisy floor and then a few bright sources that poke above that noise. I mean, that's a very simple thing to do, and that's actually very reasonable. So if you do that, if you kind of put some threshold on that dirty image, you produce an image like this, which is actually, not too bad, right? There's these few sources here, and they stick out. The problem is, what you have is, when you try to, this is for inverse filtering. So say you set this threshold down, right? So you set this threshold, you pick out these bright sources, and you say those are real, and now you've created a situation where you have a very high signal to noise image, right? Because these sources, because we've basically filtered out all noise and just left those sources behind. So we have effectively an infinite signal to noise image, kind of, you can think of it that way. Because anywhere there's sources, it's zero. Now if you do inverse filtering there, you produce a sky model like this, which doesn't look great, but this is actually much better than the original inverse filtering, which is just nothing, right? So we've kind of improved upon our inverse filtering by saying, just chop out the bright stuff and inverse filter to here. What we get is these little rings, and you can imagine you could do something smarter that these rings are of a certain size and they have some center point. You could say, well, find all the rings and say, pick that center point and say there's a source there. It's a little kind of ad hoc-y, and it's not the nicest thing. The big problem with this is that anything that's either you have to set the threshold high enough that you only get real sources, which doesn't allow you to get any weak sources, or if you set the noise too low, or you set the threshold too low, it gets into the noise and you can't use the inverse filtering. Either way, this is just not the way forward. What we have to do instead is we have to make some assumptions about the sky. We know something as radio astronomers that the sky is filled with sources, kind of have a feel for what they are, and how they're spread out. One thing we kind of make the assumption about is that most sources are kind of point-like, right? They're so far away such that they appear just basically like unresolved. They have no point. Or they're unresolved so they have no structure. They're just a single point of flux, right? Maybe some polarization. And not only that, say if you have some extended source, you can probably decompose that into a bunch of point sources, and then you can convolve with Gaussian to make a simple structure. The idea here is that starting from this very basic assumption, we're going to work towards this iterative deconvolution algorithm we call clean. So we fundamental to this whole thing is we are making the assumption that the sky can be made up of a bunch of point sources. And that's not a terrible assumption. You look at an image of the sky, right? You see mainly stars and they're unresolved. This wouldn't work in other fields, right? Imagine you're trying to deconvolve something. Say you take a photo of just a random kind of bit of anything on Earth, and you try and it's noisy and you want to somehow deconvolve it. It's not a good assumption to say that everything in that image is just a bunch of point sources, right? is that some complex structure at different size scales. And what's typical in when you take a photo of some typical thing is that instead of using point sources, you use something like wavelets, because that says something about spatial structure and whatnot. But for us, that doesn't make so much sense. What makes sense is to assume that everything's a point source. If it's not, we can still approximate it as a point source. So what you can think of is that if you assume everything's a point source, you can come up with a very simple sky model where you have just some list of sources, and at each point in the sky you have some flux. You might even include some spectral index information about frequency evolution. This is a very simple way to model the sky. And it turns out, going back to the previous lectures, is that the Fourier transform of a Dirac delta function, anyone? Constant, thank you, yeah. And so it's an easy thing to compute. And so if you have a Dirac delta function, if your sky model is made up of a bunch of point sources, Dirac delta functions, in the image, it's very easy to Fourier transform that, right? Back to visibilities. And that's part of the deconvolution process, is switching between the two. You basically make a sky model in your image domain, you transfer it back to the visibilities, and you take that model and you can subtract it off from the original data to get to the residuals. And this is kind of the best way to do it, is kind of sucking out portions of that of the model bit by bit, iteratively, until you get down to some noise level you're happy with. And so it's a nice, convenient model. So there's a limitation in assuming everything's a point source. If, say, you have some extended blob-like source, well, it's not best to model by a point source, but it's approximately right. So in this image, this slide, there's 4 different Gaussians. This one on the slide you can't even see because it's so small, but just at different size scales. And if you were to look at and if you take the Fourier transform of these, Fourier transform of Gaussian is a Gaussian, you can look at the flux on each as a function of visibility, the baseline length. So for a kind of unresolved point source here, it's always, at any baseline, you're always going to have the same amount of flux. Because that spatial structure is present in all baselines. But as you go to these kind of larger blobby sources, what you have is on the very smallest baseline, because it's some extended blobby object, you have most of the flux. As you go higher and higher baseline, longer baseline, the flux drops off. And so this point source approximation is assuming that everything has constant flux as a function of baseline length. It's not quite true, but what you can do is, instead of modeling this Gaussian on the left here as a single point source, what you can do is you can say, make it up out of 1,000 point sources. And what that can do is you say, for each point source, you give it a little bit of flux, and then you can kind of reconstruct these shapes out of here. The idea here is that, we have this Gaussian source here, right? So typically, if you wanted to kind of model this Gaussian as a point source, what you do is you give a flux, a really bright flux here, and then a bit more flux here, but not as strong. And then further out, you have even smaller flux and smaller flux. And you can approximate a Gaussian with a bunch of point source components. So you can always approximate any shape. So the direct delta function basis set, if you want to call it that, can sufficiently model any image given enough components. That's what makes it a basis set. this all being said, is that it's the point source model. There's kind of a fundamental limit, but for the most part, it holds pretty well. What kind of a lot of modern imagers use is kind of, instead of just point sources, they extend it. They say, well, let's include Gaussians. Let's do other sort of basis sets. So people might use wavelet basis sets to model really large complex structures. So this is kind of a pushing the limits of deconvolution is the current field of research. Okay, so what happens is once we go through our deconvolution step, what we have is we end up with these two things that you'll see very often after you make an image, is what is called the residual image. And this is the image that's produced after we've taken out some sky model, and this is the noise left behind. Now, there's kind of these kind of yellowish spots still. And that could still be sources, but it's hard to tell because in reality it's getting quite close to the noise. So how far you deconvolve down, kind of you can take out more sky model, but you can also have the potential to take out noise. So you have to set some threshold, make some decision about how deep you want to deconvolve. And that's a bit of an art that comes about when you just do it, and then you kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. And every field is kind of going to be different. It's going to require a lot of input and iteration to figure out how to do it well. Just to make a comment, so you end up with this residual image. You'll produce a sky model and a list of components. This residual image. Oftentimes you'll see something called a restored image. The restored image is kind of the pretty picture that a lot of people end up producing. It doesn't really produce much more information than anything else. This is simply, the restored image is simply the residual image with the sky model added back in. What you have is you have all these, so remember, if we have all these delta functions, if you add just a delta function, a bunch of delta function sky models to here, it'd just be a bunch of points everywhere, and it wouldn't look right. So what you do is you have this idea of a restoring beam. Is that, say, we have our PSF, our array PSF. So, we have this, let's say it's some like sync-like function. It's a pretty ugly PSF. And we've deconvolved this out of our image. But say you want to restore it. So what you do is you make a restoring PSF, which is typically something like you figure out the size of the PSF, then you make a Gaussian of approximately that size. And so now you have some nice smooth Gaussian, and you convolve that with the sky model, and then you add it back in. So all these point sources are these delta functions convolved with some Gaussian function to make a pretty picture. But again, it doesn't provide really any more information, but it's probably what you want to show when you're giving talks and want to impress people. Okay, here's my very simple example of this iterative deconvolution. So what does that mean? Say we have a sky. This is our true sky. So this is what we want to remember. Is that there's some noisiness. The sky has noise, right? There's some idea of this confusion noise. Maybe you've heard of this. Is that any patch of sky you look at, you might see some bright sources, but then there's some noise in the background, some fundamental noise because there's other sources back there that are just too weak to resolve. But they're all kind of back there hidden away. Maybe you don't have enough resolution to separate those out. So there's some noise floor, and then you have some bright sources usually. And then say we have some array with some really ugly point star function like this. This is a very simplistic model. So if we have those two things, we make our dirty image. Our dirty image looks like this. And you can quite clearly see, oh yeah, you can see that there's 3 points there, but they have this instrumentational PSF effect, right? All right. So here to here, and we deconvolve at that point spread function. So there's a few flavors of what's called clean, but clean is this generic type of deconvolution we all do. The first one is what's called Hagboom's clean. It's some Swedish guy back in the 70s. So I'll walk through it. It's a little tedious, but I'll walk through it. So you have some dirty image, and to start it off, if you wanted to say I have a residual image, well, your residual image would be equal to that dirty image. It's they're equivalent because you haven't taken out any sky model components yet. So once you have that, you then go back to your image. You go to this residual image. Say this is our residual image, and you look for the brightest pixel in that image, which is probably that center pixel right there. You say, okay, there's some flux there. That's my brightest point. As the brightest point is very likely a source, because it's very hard to justify how you get a bright point, assuming you're not some noise floor. That's not a source. It's not going to be a side lobe of some PSF. It's very likely a source. So what you do is then you go, okay, I found some amplitude there. I'll subtract out a portion of it. Now you don't want to actually subtract out all of it, because remember, for any point on this image here, there's other noise in there. So there's for the brightest point, there's a flux of some source, but then there's also some level of noise underlying it too. And so you don't want to just subtract it all out to zero. You just want to take out a little bit. So once you take out a little bit, you kind of make a note. I took out 1 Jansky of flux at this pixel position. And once you have that, then you can say, well, I'll position my PSF right at that point and subtract off that PSF, a bit of that power, and now I'll have a new residual image because I've removed a little bit of flux involved with the PSF from my residual image. And then you just kind of start this process over and over again. You just keep on doing this until you reach, usually you have 2 factors. Either you have a maximum number of iterations, say you want to do that 1,000 times. You can set that where you can say, well, I know kind of roughly the noise floor is 10 microjanskys. So let's deconvolve down to 30 microjanskys, just to see, you don't want to go too deep to the noise. Because if you start adding noise to your sky model, you're going to start having effects, and you don't want to throw in that noise. So even if there's only 3 sources, you might want to run 100 iterations, because you're only subtracting off, say, 10% of flux from each one of these every time. And so you're going to deconvolve multiple times on a source. And you want to be careful about what percentage of flux you subtract every time. Because if you take out too much, you subtract off too much flux, then chances are you'll get into, you're sucking out some noise. But if you do too little flux that you subtract off each time, it's just going to take forever and it won't converge to some reasonable residual image. Okay, and so if you go through that process, you have your original dirty image, and then you can get down to this residual image. And what you can see in the residual is that, well, there's still this PSF structure, and maybe you can deconvolve even a little bit more. But the danger is, maybe this is the next brightest point, you can subtract that off. But then these points are quite bright too, because it's not just the PSF structure, but there's that noise, and maybe there's just a bright noise spike. And so if you were to deconvolve one of these points, that would be bad, because that's not true sky. That's just noise that's appearing to be sky because of how the PSF side lobes are amplifying. So this is, even though the deconvolution process, you can get a lot of the sky model out, but you actually are going to leave behind flux. And this is a problem in deconvolution, is that you're always going to leave a low flux behind. It's really hard to separate it out. And so a lot of times what happens is, in order to kind of calibrate interferometric imaging, you have to connect that to single dish observation sources to calibrate the flux. And so if you go through that, for that example, you'd have a bunch of, this would be our sky model, right? Is that we have, for each pixel, for a bunch of pixel positions, you have a bit of flux. And there's kind of, the sky model is built up of components of many components, even though there's only 3 sources in our sky. And so what's going on here is you can kind of see, based on the pixel positions, that it's a lot of times the deconvolution happens at the same pixel, but only a little bit of flux is removed each time. Yeah, anyways. So that's the idea, is that it's not just a one-shot go, is that we are, we have to run this many times. And it's computationally can be expensive. There's also tricks people do to speed it up. And so what happens with, if we were to take the sky model here and try to recreate our true sky, this is what we end up with. So even though this is our true sky, this is what our deconvolution method came up with. So it's not quite perfect, is it? First of all, you see these are on the same flux scale. You can see these 2 sources are at lower flux than there. And not only that, this source up here, because of how the noise structure is, it's kind of spread out. A bunch of the flux is spread out over a few pixels. And then you see a few pixels here of power, which is presumably because of the PSF, a PSF side lobe, and then some noise. So we don't produce a perfect recovery, but we produce some sort of recovery. It's not the worst recovery. We still clearly have some points, and what you can do is, given this sky model, you can group together the points, and that's called source finding. So once you've done deconvolution, you produce some sky model of components. You then take that sky model, and then you can go through and use a few programs that say, well, this is a point, this is a few points, and let's group them together and say they're all part of the same point. Same with the source at the very top, spread out. You can group them all together and say, well, they're all part of the same source, and you can recover something more akin to the true sky model using source finding. So, going back to this very simple PSF, and for is it the next assignment, Trico? Is deconvolution the next assignment, right?
Yeah, yes, the next part for the assignment.
Right. So the next assignment, which I'll send out to you guys at some point in the future, this week, is you will have to implement portions of a clean algorithm. And the one you'll implement is part of Clark. But kind of key to the whole deconvolution aspect is you have this point spread function with these ugly side lobes that aren't real, that are geometrical. This main lobe here is much smoother, it's usually fairly Gaussian, and what that represents is your effective resolution of your array. And so what you can do is say, well, a point source, these point sources here are because they're delta function, they say we have infinite resolution, but in truth we don't. We have some resolution that's something like the PSF main lobe. This is what's called, this is the main lobe, and it's Gaussian-like. And so what we do is you take that sky model and you involve it with that main lobe. For the assignment, you'll have to figure out how to select off the main lobe of PSF, because that's part of the Clark algorithm, which I'll talk about soon enough. So keep that in mind. And so, say this is our main lobe, and you can fit a Gaussian to it, and this is now our restoring beat. And this basically says, a Gaussian, we don't have any idea about the resolution of the source, so we can't say it's a delta function, but we know kind of maximum resolution, or the reasonable kind of typical resolution of our array, and let's just say it's a Gaussian. Okay, and then, so going back to how we recreate this restored image, is we have our true sky model, our deconvolved sky model, which are different, our dirty image, and then we have our restored image, which is, remember, the residuals, the deconvolved sky model convolved with this Gaussian PSF added to the residuals. And so what you can see here is that even though you can still see the original PSF structures, what you can see is that they're lower than in the dirty image. Now we've kind of, instead of having those kind of instrumentational artifacts, we can clearly see that there's these sources here. You know, maybe we could deconvolve more, it's hard to say. But I mean, in this case, the PSF is particularly strong and aware. And so typically when you do interferometry, you won't see such a nice clear PSF. You'll just see it buried in the noise. One thing to say about this. Now it's all going. No, sorry. And here's just the cat 7. So given this dirty image, once we apply deconvolution, we produce something like this, right? And you can see you're hard pressed to say that there's some PSF structure in there, right? There's some, there's still noise, but what you can see is these kind of lower level sources here that you definitely can't see in this dirty image. So we're kind of more confident in this restored image that we're actually seeing something real. And going back, why we can do this is because we know something about our instrument. We know to a pretty good approximation what the geometry is, what our observation was, all these kind of effects. And we can then take out that instrumentational effect to recover the image of the sky up to some resolution, right? We're never going to get more resolution than our array allows us, but we can still recover the sky. Now this looks really nice and all. Next week and the week after, we'll talk about instrumentation and rhyme and calibration, which mucks this all up. Because not only do you have to do deconvolution correctly, but if your instrument is varying, is noisy, needs calibrating, you can have all sorts of imaging artifacts come out because of that. So you have two types of artifacts, deconvolution artifacts and calibration artifacts, and they show up in different ways. But in this case, this is just noisy. There's no instrumentational artifacts. That makes it a bit trickier. Okay. So this is how you implement Hogbaum's algorithm in a kind of very simple pseudocode. And I'll walk through this. It's going to be exciting. I'll walk through Clark, and then I'll walk through what's called Cotton-Schwab plane. So those are kind of the three progressively more complex ways we do deconvolution. So like I said, Hogbaum's is very simple. So you have some input. You start off with the dirty image, which we make to support transforming our visibilities. We have our PSF, which we know because of our array geometry, our sampling function, remember? And then we have these three parameters. We have this gamma. We have which the gamma parameter is that gain parameter. This is how much flux we subtract with each iteration. And then we have some threshold where we say we only clean down to this, once we reach this kind of noise level, let's stop deconvolution. And then there's this n factor, the number of iterations. So the n factor and the threshold factor, you don't need them both. Because one says, well, after 1,000 iterations, just stop, that's n. But you can also say, well, take as many iterations as you want, just clean down to some threshold. So they're depending on what we want. Why people would do that? Why you need those options? So if you're doing a deconvolution down to some like fairly high level, say you have some noise floor at 10 microjanskis, and you only want to clean down to 100 microjanskis, you can just say set the F threshold to 100 microjanskis, because that's pretty high compared to the noise floor. And they'll do that, some number of iterations, it'll be pretty quick. But if you say, well, with this 10 microjansky floor, clean down to 20 microjanskis, what's going to happen is it's going to clean real quick down to some level, say 20, 30 microjanskis, and it's going to spend a really long time trying to clean deeper because it's picking up noise artifacts all the time, subtracting off just a little bit of flux every time. And so if you try to do a deep clean, people tend to do set the number of iterations, because this can, if you say some very low noise floor, it could be 1 million iterations or something like that, and it's just too long to run on your computer, and it's just not what you want. So it's better to say, oh, just do 10,000 times. Okay, and so then to set this up, we say we have some empty sky model. We have some residual image, the residual is just simply the original dirty image, and then we kind of indicate the number of iterations we've done. And then we have this while loop that until we reach some number of iterations or until we reach a threshold, we just keep writing an iteration of deconvolution. So we find this argmax, we find the peak value in our image, and we say that's a source. We record the flux from that position, and we update the residual image by subtracting off the flux of that image. This is really the important line here, is that we update the residual image, we subtract from the original residual image some amount of flux multiplied by this gain function, multiplied by the PSF centered at that position. And so what that does is it subtracts off a little portion of the PSF. When I say a little portion, I mean a little portion in terms of amplitude. It subtracts off the entire PSF by a small amount of flux from that. And then we just update this model because we've now subtracted, say we've subtracted a Jansky of flux at some position, L and M position, we need to record that in our sky model. Then we update the sky model and we keep doing that, and eventually what it outputs is some final sky model and some residual image. So it's simple as that. How do you guys feel about this? Are you guys following this at all? Any questions on it? This is fairly important. This is the simple one, and it gets slightly more complex from here. You guys are slightly confused. Is there anything I can help you try to convince you of? What's that?
I was still doing my.
What's that?
Yeah, I'm following.
Oh, you're following still. You think so? Okay. Good. Good. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah,
Yes, yeah. So from the fixed file in the residual is given at the threshold.
Yeah. Well, any pixel, so your residual image has some number of pixels, right? And there's some flux at each pixel. So as long as there's a pixel that's greater than the threshold flux, you should continue doing the clean, right? Or as long as you haven't reached the maximum number of iterations. This line about updating the residual is we have, for each iteration, we have some residual image from the previous iteration. And we have our model PSF. And we're trying to remove the PSF structure. And so we know the flux at some pixel, so that source is that flux, but then it's multiplied by the PSF because of the convolution, right? The array geometry and whatnot has created a PSF structure around each pixel. Kind of one point to make is going back to this dirty image here. Even though there's only 3 really obvious PSFs there, every single pixel has been involved with the PSF. It's just you don't see the PSF because it's noisy everywhere else, right? So it's all within it. At every pixel, every flux value is multiplied by the PSF structure. But you just don't see it, and that's fine because we don't really care. What we really care about is separating, kind of getting these sources to here. Because who cares if the noise here has been multiplied by the PSF? Because we're never going to get to that point. We're never going to care about that noise level. We just want to bring out the sources that are above some noise level. Okay, we'll continue on. So yeah, I'm going to walk through this once more because it's useful to really sit on the simple clean for a bit. So we have our dirty image. Dirty image is usually, some number of pixels, usually square. It's almost always square. It would be weird to make a non-square image in radio interferometry. We have some PSF, which is also typically square. And then we have our various kind of factors. So the gain factor, the gain has to be between 0 and 1. If it was minus, it would mean you're adding flux back in, which wouldn't make sense. If it was more than 1, you would be subtracting more than the total flux there. Typically, we do around 10% for the gain, 0.1. But this all depends on your application. It could be different. It's better if you have the computing resources, you want the gain factor to be as small as possible because you're more detailed in the amount of flux you're removing. Because if this value is too big, you'll end up removing noise. You prefer to spend more computing time and remove less noise. But if you say you have some, you're given some visibility sets and measurement set, and it's your first time looking at it, and you're like, well, let's do some simple deconvolution. Well, after you make your dirty image to see what it looks like, you go, well, let's just do some simple deconvolution. You can set this gain factor fairly high because you want just a quick image to see how it looks. As you want to dig deeper, you turn that gain factor down a bit. So this F threshold, how do you set this F threshold? It all comes down to what the science is. So say you make a dirty image, you look at that dirty image, you see, oh, there's some sources in there. What you can do is you can figure out what the typical noise floor is by looking at the noise in some region that doesn't look like it has sources. And say, again, it has, 10 microjansky kind of RMS noise. So being the RMS noise, you don't want to dig down to 10 microjanskys because you're definitely going to pick up a ton of flux from noise. You want to say, well, let's multiply that by a factor of 3 or 5 and only dig down to 50 microjanskys instead. Very likely to hit to deconvolve a lot of noise. That's good. The maximum number of iterations, how you decide that, usually comes about after you've spent a bit of time trying to deconvolve some image, and you kind of have a feel for how many times it should take. So this one's kind of something you don't set until later. Okay, so we initialize this. We say we have our inputs, we have these parameters, dirty image, we have PSF as our inputs. And what do we want to get? We want to get some sky model and some residual image. So our sky model is simply empty, right? We start off with an empty sky model because we haven't added anything into it yet. And then we have our residual image. The residual is effectively the dirty image with the sky model convolved with the PSF subtracted away. And since the sky model is empty, the residual image starts off as a dirty image. By the end of any deconvolution process, we want some sky model of components and some residual image. And that'll happen all the time. Sometimes you'll see this restored image. I think that's an output of the CASA imager is a restored image. It's a nice one you can look. But you can always make the restored image from these two things. Okay. And then, so for each iteration, we find the brightest pixel. We say that's the source, and say it's some amount of flux. We subtract off some amount of flux based on that gain factor. And then we multiply by PSF because it spreads out that flux over some kind of spatial region. And by subtracting off the PSF, we subtract out the side lobes and the structure of that PSF, the instrumentational structure from the residual image. And then we have a new meta residual image. And then we record that position and that bit of flux we subtracted out. You happy with this? It's okay? I can get the boring because I'm repeating this a lot, but this is, you don't have to hear it once until you remember, because it all comes from this. Okay, so to slightly make it more complex, and the Clark algorithm is the bits that you'll do in your assignment, is there's a bunch of flaws with the original Hogbaum deconvolution. Why Hogbaum exists was because it's very simple, and being written in the late 70s, early 80s, computing was very limited. So as time went on, as the raging 1980s arrived, people came up with a better method. It's called Clark's. So it's all pretty much the same, right? The inputs are exactly the same. The output is exactly the same. Given our dirty image, or PSF, return a sky model and a residual image. But there's a few kind of added factors. So the first, in this initialize, same as Hogbaum. So when you initialize, you have some empty sky model. Say the initial residual image is simply the dirty image. But then we have this other factor out here, this structure here, which is a little funny. So what this is what we want to do is we have some large PSF, we have the large image of the PSF. The PSF has some main lobes, some side lobes that go out spatially. But really, the most important kind of artifacts of the PSF is that main lobe and those first few side lobes. Everything else adds an effect, but it's very low level because the side lobes tend to drop off as a function of the distance from the main lobe. And so what that means is that what we can do is we can take a subset of that total PSF image and only concentrate on that central region. Why you do that is, it turns out the Clark method does this because it's a computationally kind of nice approximation to dealing with the entire PSF. And so what this last initialization parameter is, it says, return me a function that gives me the PSF and the main region of the PSF. And what this is useful for is that in Clark's method, there's this idea of the major and the minor cycle. And you can see this minor cycle here is simply a calling to Hogbaum's plane algorithm. But the major cycle kind of is used to improve upon this Hogbaum call. And so what the idea here is that what you do is that you select off a small portion of that PSF, and then you'll call Hogbaum using that small region of the PSF. And what you'll do is a really shallow, simple deconvolution. You won't go very deep because there's all sorts of artifacts that show up because of Hogbaum. What you want to do is you want to just use the speed and efficiency due to the simplicity of Hogbaum to do a very simple deconvolution. And that's what's called the minor cycle. And then we'll kind of adapt it in the major cycle. So this minor cycle is right here. It says, is that, again, while we haven't reached some threshold, we go, well, let's find the brightest source, the flux. These three lines up here before this minor cycle, to the minor cycle, are exactly the same as Hogbaum. And what you do is you then call Hogbaum on this subset of the point spread function, the residual image, and then there's this RPSF function, or RPSF factor. And what that RPSF factor is, it's a ratio between the first side lobe and the peak side lobe. So let's just say this is 1, and this is 0.2 or something, right? I don't know. And so basically you want our PSF is just simply equal to, I think it's forget how it's defined. It's either 1 over 0.2 or flip-flopped. But it's a ratio between these 2 points. So the idea here is that since we've taken a subset of the PSF, we want to do a shallow clean. So say we find some bright point source, we want to clean down to basically this level of the PSF, because that means we're only cleaning down to a point where we're guaranteed we're not hitting the first side lobe of something. This is what we mean by shallow clean. So even though this is quite a significant side lobe, you only need to clean a little bit in hog bomb. So that's this R factor. So instead of going back to our hog bomb method here, instead of doing F threshold, just a straight F threshold, saying cut off at that point, we want to cut off at that F threshold, or the max flux of the point, and then multiplied by this R of this F. So as I look at this now, it's the other way around. So that's this shallow factor. And so once we do the shallow factor, this is all, Pogbom's method is all done in the image domain. And in fact, this leads to a bunch of artifacts that it's smarter to actually do deconvolution in the visibility domain. It's just a bit more computation. So what you do is you say, well, I've produced some partial sky model with this shallow Pogbom call. And I'll take that, remember, it's a bunch of delta functions. You can easily compute the visibilities of those delta functions as some complex phase and constants. So we produce some kind of a model visibility set from that partial sky model. And then we go back to the sampling function by doing the Fourier transform of PSF. And what we can do is we can update the residual image by subtracting off from the residual image the multiplication of that sampling function with that sky model and Fourier transforming that. So this component here, this is this improvement that's doing. So what's happening there is that because we're subtracting off everything from the visibility space, we are not introducing imaging domain artifacts, which show up when you use Pogbom. Some examples of this. But anyway, so you can see this is a slightly more computationally expensive thing to do, doing Fourier transforms between visibility and image domain. That's okay. Computers are much faster than they were in the 1980s. So we do this, and then we update the sky model with this partial set, and we kind of repeat. Okay, yeah, so this is this idea of the major cycle. Is that the minor cycle is the shallow called the Pogbom. The major cycle is taking that very simple, small set of components from that shallow sky model, converting them to visibilities and subtracting them there instead of subtracting them from the image domain. One kind of intuition for why the visibility domain is better than the image domain is that you have some PSF that you make, some image of the PSF. The PSF goes on forever, right? You go off into a sphere. But we're only taking a small section of that. And so you're subtracting that from the image. Basically, at some point, because there's a limited size of that image, there's kind of some cutoff, right? But if you do that in the visibility space, the visibility space is compact in the sense that there are no edges. So you can just subtract off your visibilities there. And not introduce these image kind of edge effects. Yeah.
Is this also true if you choose 4 times larger D?
4 times larger than, yeah. Sure, yeah. So you can, say you have some image. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Say we have just our image of our sky, very small, and then we have some image of the PSF. There's little sources there. And so what you can do is you can make an image that's, or make a PSF. If you image the PSF out to something like, I guess is it 3 times? It'd be 3 times larger, right? Wouldn't have to be 4.
If you're in one corner, you're still not the whole.
What's that? You can do 3.
Yeah, you're right. If you're in one corner, yeah.
So if you make it, so this is our image here, this is our PSF image. This is the image of the PSF. You can always kind of shift, wherever you shift the PSF within this image here, you're always going to, you never reach an edge. And so that's a way around using Clark and still using Hogbaum. This is just as the only, I guess it's a different computational difference. And typically what happens is that people don't implement it this way, they implement it in that your PSF is the same size as your image, and they just use not Hogbaum. Right? There are ways around this stuff. Okay, I'm going to say let's take a break for 5 minutes, 10 minutes before we get into the last one. Yeah, okay. It's tricky. It's a non-intuitive thing because we only do it in radio interferometry, and it's hard to find other kind of fields, other examples where this type of deconvolution happens. So please ask me questions if you guys can figure out a question to ask. But it is confusing and it's tough to teach. Anyways, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Let's take a break. Okay, the last one I want to talk about is it's called Kahn-Schwab-Kling. I won't dig too much into it. Kahn-Schwab is typically what most people use now because it's the most accurate in terms of kind of creates the fewest artifacts. The important point to know is that, so you can kind of think of the 3 methods. So in Hogbaum, you're doing an image domain deconvolution, and Clark, you're doing visibility domain. But you're doing it in a way that you're just doing the Fourier transform between the 2 domains. And so we call that a gridded visibility domain deconvolution. And remember last week when we talked about gridding and degridding, this whole degridding idea comes in with Kahn-Schwab-Kling. So you go from your image, which is gridded, to some visibilities, and then you degrid it to the original raw visibilities that we observed. And that's where you remove from. And so going back to the original visibilities removes the most artifacts, but is computationally very expensive. Remember last week I said gridding and degridding are always the most expensive things to do in radio interferometry. So if you can afford to do it, you want to do the Kahn-Schwab method versus the other ones. So, you know, I've been saying this stuff if you can afford to do it. When modern computers, every computer you guys use and work on, it's fine to do Kahn-Schwab. That's the one you should do. If you want, the reasons why would you want to do Clark or Hogbaum? Well, they're very simple. You can implement them yourselves. You'll do part of that. And they run pretty quick. So if you want to do a quick, dirty deconvolution, you can just do Hogbaum or Clark. I almost always say do Clark there. Okay, so the methods. Let's compare them for a minute. Is that Hogbaum, as I said, it's very easy to implement. You know, if you have a weekend, sit down for an afternoon, just write your own version. People typically do that. It's very easy. A downside is that because it's image domain deconvolution, deconvolution, you're not taking into account W term effects. So we've made this assumption that the PSF remains the same throughout the image. And as you guys may remember from last week, the PSF changes because of the W term effect. So if you're doing a wide field image, Hogbomb's not going to do a very good job of deconvolving out that PSF. It's going to leave behind all sorts of artifacts. And then there's this aliasing factor. It's aliasing artifact that Josh kind of mentioned. You can make just a bigger PSF. You can, but typically most imagers produce a PSF that's the same size as the image, but you can make it bigger. So for Clark, it's only a little bit harder to write. You can see there's actually, for both the Hugbomb and Clark, there's a Hugbomb notebook in the book if you want to see how they implement it. And the Clark implementation, which you guys will make edits to work, is very slightly more advanced. So they're very easy to write. I want to say they're very easy. They're reasonable to write. And another thing, it takes care of these aliasing artifacts. Again, the limitation is because the W term effect is done during the convolution, during the process of going from ungridded to gridded visibilities, it doesn't quite do the best job of correcting for these W term effects. Now, that's what Von Schwab's quite nice is. You can do that by going back to the ungridded visibilities. You can correct for the W term effect. It's just, this is much kind of, it's difficult to write. I wouldn't recommend you write your own Von Schwab unless you're really bored. Because you do have to incorporate gridders and degridders and all sorts of computationally efficient methods to correct W terms. If you do want to write one, you can probably write it as a PhD thesis. People do. Short version, and reiterate it one more time. Hogbomm and Clark, easy to implement, or reasonable to implement. In almost all cases, you want to use Von Schwab. Okay, so we've been playing. I've just been showing you some examples. So let's go back to our Cat 7 image and walk through how the different kind of iterations of deconvolution, how this happens. So this is our restored image. This is what we'll get to in the end. Just remember our sky model, which is the sky model, and this is our idealized Gaussian PSF, and then the residuals added in. So this is our pretty picture we get at the end of the day. Okay, so when we initialize our imager, our deconvolver, we have our residual image, which is just, remember, the dirty image, and then we have an empty sky model. So right now, there's nothing there. This is just our initialization. We haven't done a single iteration of deconvolution. Now, if we step forward one, what happens is a little source appears here. What happens is a middle source, that's the brightest flux, a bit of it has been subtracted out. So we've subtracted a little bit that you can't even notice from the residual image and just added it to our sky model. So now our sky model has a single point source. And then if we step ahead a few more iterations, 10, what you see is, you don't see 10 sources, but what you do see is that central source has gotten brighter because we've subtracted off a bit more gain with each iteration. And at a certain point, that central source has gotten weak enough that that source kind of far away is the brightest source in the residual image. Now we want to say that's our next source to subtract out. So we do that, we can go 100 iterations. So after 100 iterations, we're starting to remove most of the sources. There's very few sources left. Going back, you can see these things are, well, they're still clearly sources, but by the time we're down to this residual image, it's hard to just say that they're sources or not, or if they're just noise. And in our sky model, we can clearly see there's a bunch of point sources that we've added. Do I have one more? And so now if we do 300 iterations of this, we're really at some level. You really couldn't convince me that any of these are sources anymore, because it's too much in the noise. And then we have a nice sky model, right? All our point sources have been subtracted off, And now we're at that point. So an interesting thing to look at is, in this Clark implementation, what these visibilities actually look like. So instead of looking at the sky model, let's look at the restored image, or the restored visibilities, or restored, yeah. So why I put restored? So imagine, for example, in this case, we took this sky model and made a restored image by adding these two together. So it's not too different from the original dirty image, but some of the sources have been removed. Now, if you take that restored image, which is this, and do the Fourier transform of it, you produce its gridded visibilities. It will look something like this. How to interpret this here is, this is obviously the sampling function of cat 7, remember? At some declination, these arcs are cutting through. The PSF is the Fourier transform of the sampling function, and because, for the most part, everything in here is convolved with the PSF still, you expect to see basically the sampling function to show up still. And this is for 3 iterations, but now if we step ahead a few iterations, what happens when we, what should happen when we are subtracting off this PSF structure is that this sampling function should disappear, and since we take all these delta functions and convolve them with our idealized PSF, a Gaussian, what you should expect to see is that these gaps of the sampling function should be filled in, and a Gaussian, a nice smooth Gaussian function should show up. Because we're making, this is really a kind of a key point to make, is that we are making the assumption, I mean, fundamental to all this deconvolution is that everything can be modeled as a point source, and then we convolve that with a Gaussian because of our resolution of this array. And so that should show up as if, you can think of that as saying, even though we don't sample the full UV space, we sample it enough, and we've included this assumption that we can then fill in these gaps by saying it should be Gaussian-like. And so that's indeed what kind of starts to happen. So after 30 iterations, our restored image improves, and you start to see kind of this bluish glow about here. And kind of maybe you can see that the sampling function has gotten, the amplitude has dropped off just a little bit, and it's spread out that power into a Gaussian way. And as we dig deeper, at 300 iterations, you really start to see a lot of that sampling function structure disappear. It's kind of only a Gaussian response left. And this is how we end up with a kind of our nice image, is that we've removed most of that PSF, most of the sampling function, and filled in our UV gaps into a smooth way. And the scale of this Gaussian function has to do with the scale of our array resolution. I'll do it more now. Okay. So, I'm going to hit this home once more, is that in deconvolution, we are kind of filling in information that we didn't have before. We're kind of creating information based on the assumption that we have about the sky as being point sources. If that assumption is not correct, then deconvolution will result in errors. It won't be perfect, it won't be nice. This is a fairly valid assumption to make in interferometry, and we continue to do as we push the limits of the type of sources we observe and how we observe. We run into the limits of this. We have to come up with new methods. One thing we didn't talk about last week or whatnot is that a lot of these sampling functions, we fill in these UV tracks because there's some frequency bandwidth, right? And the more bandwidth we cover, assuming these are broad spectrum sources, kind of more sensitive we can become, the more of the UV space we can fill in. But as you probably are aware, that sources have spectral indices, and so that means at different frequencies they have different fluxes. They might have different shapes and different structures. So we have this issue of that, even though we've only been talking about this for single frequency, a sky model, single flux, single frequency produces kind of, we don't have to care about the spectral index. If we want to cover some significant bandwidth, we have to take that into effect. And the simplest idea to do is what's called multi-frequency synthesis. It's just to say, well, over our band, the fluxes remain constant enough that we can just add all the visibilities together. And what this allows us to do is kind of add a nice built-in UV space, a nice PSF, easy to deconvolve. But if we have a really broad band, there's going to be significant flux changes for these sources across the band. And so what you might have to do is, instead of combining that all together, you might only be able to image certain frequency chunks at a time. And then what you can do in the image space is you can add them together, or you make an image cube. So depending on your science and what you're trying to do, if it's a nice flat broad spectrum source, it doesn't matter how much bandwidth you do. And so the two different options to do it, kind of when you use an imager, you'll quite typically see this as this idea of doing channel imaging. So say you have some bandwidth of 1024 frequency channels. You can image each one of those channels. And then once you make an image, you can glue them all together, add them all together, and combine them. Or you can do multi-frequency synthesis, which allows you to produce the image in the visibility plane by adding them all up there. Now, the pros and cons of that is that the pro of the channel imaging is that you can make the assumption that the sources are the same flux or don't have flux evolution across the band. There's only a single channel, and so you can have a different PSF for each channel. But what this is that the whole point of doing multi-frequency or broadband observations is to really improve the signal to noise. And so if you're only doing imaging of a single channel, you have a much higher noise floor than if you combine them all together. It's a 1024. If you have 1024 frequency channels, your noise will be root 1024 times brighter on each channel. So you would really like to combine channels to get to a lower noise floor. And so that's what you can do with the multi-frequency synthesis. The only problem is that you have to kind of consider what does it mean to have a PSF in multi-frequency synthesis. The PSF at the high end of the frequency band will be smaller than the low end because of angular resolution as a function of wavelength. So if you say, well, the PSF is the high frequency part, that means you'll have a narrower PSF and the low frequency will be wider. So if you use the high frequency bit and subtract that PSF during deconvolution, what you'll have is kind of these structures that show up, these kind of these wavy structures. And if you use the low frequency bit, you'll get these negative bowls. And this is quite typical, is that you'll after deconvolution you get these negative kind of ringing effects. If you're trying to deconvolve too broad of a band, so usually you have to kind of chunk it up into small bits, kind of somewhere in between basically. Instead of just doing every channel, say you group together 10 channels, and then you image each one of those, deconvolve each one of those. So then you have 10 images which you can then add together or something. And so this, going back to this W term effect from last week, you have these artifacts that show up because of our approximation to the band standard Zernike relation. And as you move further away from the face center, you get this kind of weird extended PSF structure. And so when you do an image domain and the gridded visibility domain methods of deconvolution, like Clark and Hogbaum, you can't account for these. This is a correction. This correction is done in the griddy phase. And so if you've already gridded your data and you haven't corrected for it, you're never going to correct for it. So yeah, we're talking about this competition. So there's kind of methods, these deconvolution methods beyond the classic clean, and sometimes they're called some sort of clean, sometimes they're called something else. This is from a paper a few years ago, is that this compares 4 different methods of deconvolution. The top is clean. You can't really see it up there, but you'll just have to believe that there's a bunch of point sources. That's a clean model. And then if you take that model and you convolve it with this idealized beam, this Gaussian, you get to see the kind of the sky model. And then if you take that sky model, subtract it off from the observed, you get some error. You get your error and you get your residuals, right? Because it's so extended and blobby, the source, the point surface approximation doesn't work very well. And so you need to come up with something else. There's this kind of extension to clean called multi-scale clean. It says instead of just using delta function point sources, let's also include Gaussians of various scales. The reason we've used delta functions in the past is because they're simple to compute the Fourier transform of. Gaussians are pretty simple too, and so you can kind of just include that into your basis set and extend your delta function basis set to include some Gaussians. When you do that, you can create these extended sources which produce much better errors and residuals. There's still some artifacts and whatnot. The problem is that as you look at more detailed structure, they're not well modeled by a Gaussian. You can kind of see in this row is that little blue structure because it looks like there's some sort of ring or something, and it's hard to model a Gaussian, a ring as a set of Gaussians. And so then there's these other things like, compressed sensing maybe you've heard of, and there's this other method, but this uses wavelet analysis to come up with new models, and which can provide very nice residuals. The two kind of limitations why we don't use maybe compressed sensing all the time is that it's really expensive to do on computers, even our modern computers. And they're very specific to a certain kind of field or observation. You have to know when to use them. Whereas clean and multi-scale clean are much more generic. Maybe they're not going to produce the perfect result you want, but they're going to provide kind of a more typical result at any kind of image you are trying to deconvolve. You only get to these methods when you kind of run out of options. So just kind of gives you an idea. So on Friday we'll do imaging with CASA, and the CASA imager is called clean. So there's a bunch of options you can do to set different methods and all sorts of parameters, what type of clean you want to do. There's 2 other standalone imagers, this LW imager, which is used less and less these days, but basically used to be part of the CASA imager, but now it's kind of separate. And there's WS Clean, which is a nice imager that if you want a standalone imager, I would recommend using. And it does usually what you'll see is that these, they're called imagers, but they'll typically have an imaging component and deconvolution component. Okay. We're getting towards the end of deconvolution. The last one that I want to talk about is how we know what makes a good image. Because this is a bit of an abstract concept, especially in radio astronomy, when we don't really know what the original image is. We have some guess based on the deconvolution process, but it's really hard to know when you should stop deconvolution, because you get to tweak these parameters to decide on the end. There's not like a perfect solution. So this is what we ended up with when we did 300 iterations of our Cat7 field. Is that we've got a sky model that looks reasonable, and then we have this something that looks quite noise-like. Well, why 300 iterations? Why not 290? Why not 310? Like, what was noise? Have we already added noise, or can we deconvolve a bit more and get a bit more accurate flux out? There's not really an answer to that, unfortunately. What you can do is you can go, well, these point sources kind of happened in the mid-region and then didn't really show up on the edges, so maybe everything here is noise, and so I can say, well, what's the noise of this? And if the noise in that central region is similar to the noise on the edges, that's probably a reasonable place to say stop. So yeah, I mean, you can imagine if we kind of go to 1,000 iterations. If you go to 1,000 iterations, you definitely got all the flux of those sources out, but now you've also picked up a bunch of noise, right? So you've over-devolved. And that's not very helpful. That's actually not the point. The point is to separate the sky signal from the noise. When should you halt the deconvolution process? It really is, this is one of these things about you just have to do it enough times to deconvolve. Making images, you can go through this process a bunch of, here's some visibility set, maybe I need to calibrate it, maybe I don't. I'm going to produce an image, a dirty image, and then I'm going to need to deconvolve it. And there's all these parameters. I don't really know what the answer is, so what you'll have to do is you'll go, well, I'll do a little bit of deconvolution, I'll see how it works, and then maybe I'll turn up this parameter a bit, maybe do a bit more, a bit more. You'll keep iterating on this until you get to a point where you're happy with it. And what makes it good is really looking at the sky model. You want to look at there's kind of 2 points you'll look at. So you'll want to look at the sky model to see how it looks, see if it looks like there's noise showing up, if you've over deconvolved. And then you'll want to look at the residuals. The residuals will show you, if you subtract, if there's still obviously sources there. And another thing it will show you is maybe there's some artifacts showing up because of calibration or because of how you're doing deconvolution. And maybe you just need to stop. Maybe even if the sky model looks good, if the residuals look bad, then you need to go back and start somewhere else. When you make an image, after deconvolution, I really recommend the first thing you look at is the residuals. That's going to be the most interesting bit to look at. It's going to be the boring bit to look at because you want to look at the nice, pretty picture. But the residuals really tell you how things are doing. What makes a good image? This is very easy to answer in other fields. What makes a good image? You can say, well, I have, say you take just a normal photograph of something, you can measure that, you can measure the noise of that. Like that's an easy thing to work out. Because you can, in low light, it'll be noisier than highlight or kind of typical light and whatnot. There's some idea of like reality. There's some kind of initial truth. Whereas in radio interferometry, we don't actually know what we're looking at. That's the whole point. We're trying to figure out what the sky model is. If we had a true model of the sky, there would be no point in observing it. Right? So typically what people do is they go, well, let's look at this dynamic range of an image. What's the peak flux versus the kind of noise level. And you'll see that show up quite a bit in imaging. People talk about the dynamic range. The big issue with dynamic range is it doesn't say anything about the structures. These two images, where this one is clearly a better image because it doesn't have W term effects, have the same dynamic range. So obviously it's not that good of a metric. It's kind of it's a decent metric. It says something about how deep you've separated signal from noise, but it's not really a full, complete statement about the information. So I would recommend not putting too much weight on dynamic range. And there's all sorts of ways to compute dynamic range. Going back to this image, how do you compute the dynamic range on these images? Do you take the entire image and compute the noise factor for that, or do you take a region which I know to be noise-free, or do I take kind of a central region, or just on the edges? By picking different regions of noise, so you can do, if you use the entire image, you produce a signal to noise of this. But if you just look at just a residual image, you have a higher signal to noise. Say you randomly sample, the pixels, and you can compute that. It's likely that you won't land on any point sources and get that. Whatever method you want to use, you come up with different dynamic range values. And so there's not really an accurate standard way to compute dynamic range. I think it's not super useful to do. This is what people typically do. choose a relatively empty region, and that's very ad hoc, right? Like, if you want to maximize the signal to noise, which is this step, is that you go, well, let's just find the most, I'll physically look at this image and go, well, this region seems to have the just noise, I'll keep that, and that's how I can keep my data. Yeah.
I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
You divide your the brightest source
Yeah.
by the first negative. The first negative low is
First negative low, what do you mean?
well, I have a negative, the maximum negative
Yeah.
pixel that has absolute value.
That's an interesting idea.
It's mostly next to the source. You have swings there.
Yeah.
In between.
Yeah.
That's the hardest.
But the problem, yeah, you'd almost want to pick like a few of them or something, or like pick the kind of average out the noise. That's not bad. Image quality assessment, I think we're running out of time. Okay, one of the last things I'll talk about before we finish up is this idea of source finding. After deconvolution, we have a kind of this big list of sky components, and we, as you'll recall, a bunch of these are fluxes in the same place. And so it's easy, you can imagine grouping them together by going through like every pair of pixels and looking for all flux and adding those together. That's a simple thing. But what happens when you have kind of pixels right next to each other with some flux because it's spread out? So you kind of want to group those all together. This is this idea of source finding. Is that you have these sources here, you have a grid of sources here, and you want to group them together and say they're kind of their own unit. If you compute kind of the spectral density or flux density of this, make a histogram of this, it shows up as this. And if you compute the standard deviation, you see that, the noise is within the standard deviation, and this stuff is above the noise, and you want to say, those are sources, and I want to somehow group those together. And depending on how you do that, there's kind of a number of ways. This computing the standard deviation necessarily makes it wider because you have all these high intensity flux sources showing up. You can choose other things like a MAD estimator, which gives you a more compact selection of more noise components. And this separates the noise from the sources that you have in your new image. And so using that, you can separate out the model and the residual. There's a few source finders people use now, and you don't need to really write your own or anything. This is kind of an after effect. So once you have your sky components, once you've made a nice deconvolved image, obviously the point is not to make a nice image, it's to do some sort of science on it, right? And a typical bit of science to do is to go, well, given this image, given this field, what sources are there, where the flux, where the polarization properties are extended, and applying a source finder post deconvolution is kind of the next stage to helping you get your science done. Okay, last two slides. My main points. Deconvolution is the process of removing instrumentational effects from the signal. We have this imperfect instrument which adds noise, adds artifacts. We want to get to some sky signal. And that's all that deconvolution is trying to do. And in our case, deconvolution here is an iterative process to remove the signal from the noise and to take into account these effects. We make an assumption that things are point sources, limited to the resolution of the array by some Gaussian function. And so typically imagers will include some sort of deconvolution implementation. And source finding is this sort of final step to combine the components into actual
sources or what we think are actual sources.
Okay. Are there any questions? We're done. Okay. Our homework. So in order to set up for the deconvolution assignment, I'm asking you guys to answer some of these questions. They'll kind of hopefully get you set up to understand how the deconvolution assignment works. Yeah. And of course, let me know. Yeah, so this assignment will be due on the 10th. I'll send it out. When should I send it out?
I think the best is Friday because otherwise they lose focus from those abilities.